So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining this special edition of the Florida Food Policy Council's Florida Food Forum. I am Dell deChant, the committee leader and host of the forum. Joining our event today via cyber systems or phone lines, and welcome to all watching and recording of this event in the future. With us from the council is the council's administrator, Kendra Love. Kendra will be handling the technical and managerial aspects of our meeting. I'm also asking Kendra to let us all know when the session will close and give us an alert when we have 5 minutes left in the program. We are also asking viewers to submit questions using the chat box, and this will allow us to get in more questions. And Kendra, could you tell us just a bit about the chat box right now so the folks that are chiming in know how to use it?
Sure. So I will send a message in our text box right now. If you have a question during the forum, go ahead and type it in here. Just so you know, we can hear and see you, so please keep your video and audio turned off while we're doing the presentations, and during our Q&A session, we'll open up for questions and video.
Great, thank you, Kendra. Our topic for this special edition of the Florida Food Forum is food insecurity and food justice, topics that are very much at the forefront of food policy discussions and concerns, and topics made all the more urgent by weaknesses in various systems of our industrial consumption-based culture revealed by the onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our session today engages these topics relative to both the urgent concerns of the moment and the deeper systemic weakness that we find in contemporary culture. So we thank everyone for joining us on this special event. A document that introduces our presenters for today is posted on the council's website. And if you registered for the event, you have seen the introductions and the biographical backgrounds. My introductions will be very brief, so please take a look at the website for more details on the talents and the professional backgrounds of our guests. To get a better understanding of food insecurity and food justice, our panelists bring unique approaches to the topic based on professional and personal engagement with food insecurity and food justice. Will Schanbacher brings scholarly background on the topic based on his research and extensive publications, such as The Politics of Food and the forthcoming book, Food Insecurity, a Reference Handbook. Arianne Corbett addresses the topics through the lens of food and nutrition policy and her leadership in efforts to reduce food insecurity among children, especially through her work with the No Kid Hungry campaign in the Tampa Bay region. Erica Hall brings a background in community organizing, public advocacy, and direct training for communities struggling with food insecurity and cultural marginalization, with professional guidance shared with numerous food justice groups around the nation. We are very honored to have these three distinguished leaders with us. Welcome to you all, and welcome to all who are logging in or calling in. We'll follow the sequence in which our panelists were introduced. Each will have 10 minutes to present, and then we'll open up the system for questions. And so we will begin our session with Will Schanbacher. Welcome, Will.
Hello, thank you all for having me. I'm going to share my screen here. Can we see this?
Yes.
So today, thank you, Dell. Today, I would like to address our topic of food insecurity and food justice via a path towards achieving this, namely that of food sovereignty. So as Dell mentioned in the introduction, the story I'd like to tell today is a tale of what we might call two pandemics: structural racism and an unjust food system. Currently in the news, we're hearing talk of a second wave, even if we've left the first wave of COVID-19. I don't know if wave is a good way to describe the racism in this country. More of a tidal wave that began from the very founding and has not yet receded. So I would like to address our issue of food insecurity and food justice via these two current events. Particularly with COVID-19 and global food insecurity, it has struck our world's most vulnerable populations, our communities of color. They have been negatively impacted by COVID-19, and in particular, our food security systems will be affected negatively right now and in its aftermath. Feeding Tampa Bay, for example, here locally, has fed between 650,000 and 1.7 million families since the onset of COVID-19. They are really on the front lines, leading food banks, but also lobbying local officials and the federal government for increased support for federal programs such as SNAP, a much needed service here in our local area. COVID-19, its destructions, while are being made more apparent right now, really are a manifestation of an underlying issue that has been around before the onset of the pandemic, namely that of food insecurity in our populations, our people of color, namely African American, Latinx, and indigenous populations. So COVID-19 is just another sort of manifestation of a historical trend. COVID-19 in particular is hurting these communities because these communities often live in crowded housing areas. They work in our essential fields and also in the fields. They have inconsistent access to healthcare, also tend to suffer from chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, and things like stress and immunity. These were issues that were existent prior to COVID-19, but the disease itself, the pandemic, has created an exaggeration of these things. Again, locally, Feeding Tampa Bay has shown in our backyards here early evidence that food insecurity is rising among Black and Latino communities. And the medium-term economic impacts will be felt. They already are here, as we can see in our grocery stores, but as you can see in the graph here, this is related back to even 2008, 2009. Policymakers and officials are already seeing sort of evidence that we're going to see some of the same effects that happened back then, right? And if you look at the orange and blue bars there, we see that like the recession in 2008 and 2009, this will likely negatively impact Black and Hispanic populations more so. Today, U.S. households also suffer from levels of food insecurity that are really unacceptable. But we see positive signs. Local groups are organizing and providing emergency food, but they are also trying to affect systemic change through job training programs, for instance, through reimagining ways in which food assistance programs, NGOs, and other charities can begin to incorporate more healthy foods into the food assistance that we provide. Feeding America, for example, is one organization that promotes certain strategies to mitigate food insecurity through more substantial structural changes. And these include efforts such as providing awareness through PSAs, but also lobbying Congress to fund anti-hunger campaigns. With that said, I would like to suggest that food insecurity efforts that we have here locally are excellent, but we also need to move beyond that. We need to incorporate more perhaps radical strategies. And this is where I would like to introduce the concept of food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is a food movement, a global food movement about systemic change. It is about direct democratic control of how we feed and nourish ourselves, how we maintain the land, water, and other resources to the benefit of current and future generations, as well as how we interact with other groups, peoples, and cultures. Food sovereignty addresses the historic dimensions of food insecurity, how colonization, slavery, and structural racism and economic policies have created and perpetuate constant states of food insecurity. So food sovereignty really seeks to revitalize the cultural importance of food and feeding people. It's not enough just to sustain the current system, but we need to recognize things like the beauty of our land, the joy and the laughter that we have through eating together in community, all the way down to the conversations that we have at our dinner tables. And so I would like to present possibly a way in which to conceptualize the forward movement of food insecurity and food sovereignty efforts to create a more just food system. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I would like to address this through the current issues of COVID-19, as well as our current issues of race and violence against people of color. With respect to COVID-19, we have increased efforts to find a vaccine, to reimagine a healthier, better, more effective public health system, and also ways in which to resurrect our food supply chain. With respect to violence against people of color, we need to address things like food insecurity, health disparities, as well as care for the land. And so within a reformist sort of policy framework, our local groups are doing a great job of providing emergency need. They're starting to look at ways in which emergency food can be healthier, which can further promote solutions in our racism within the food system. Namely, how do we fix a broken food system? I would like to suggest that this is great, but we need even more proactive or progressive policies that include the concept of food sovereignty. In the language that we hear today, this relates to anti-racist projects. So it's not enough to simply raise our hands and say, I'm not racist. It's not enough to say, hey, let's provide food. Rather, we need to be proactive in our anti-racist efforts and in our efforts to promote food sovereignty, things beyond just the status quo in the food system. So to give you another visual here, as we move towards food sovereignty, we see that it is a combination of food sovereignty, anti-racist efforts, and ultimately food justice. So we can only accomplish these things through a holistic, a fully systemic and structural address of these issues. So in closing, I would like to suggest a couple of policy prescriptions here. On a social level, drawing from a local group here in Florida, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, they run by a saying, consciousness plus commitment equals change. So we need to become aware, but we also need to be committed. Only then will we have change. At USF, at my institution, we have two organizations, the USF Urban Food Sovereignty Group, as well as our Center for the Advancement of Food Security and Healthy Communities. Reach out, contact me, and I can connect you with groups at USF that are interested in these efforts. We are in these two organizations. The Food Sovereignty Group is advancing interdisciplinary research and action on urban food sovereignty. Our Center for the Advancement of Food Security and Healthy Communities is doing similar research to facilitate social equity that results in healthier communities. On an individual level, we can build our own gardens. We can circumvent glitches in the food chain by producing our own food. Now, this is not going to be a cure-all solution, but it does give us a small glimpse into the workers that bring food to our tables, right? The efforts that go into growing food, and it helps us understand our natural world in a better way and how that is connected to land, as well as the historic injustices associated with land in this country, which directly relates to our conversation on racism and justice. And lastly, in my particular field of religious studies, I've led efforts and continue to lead efforts with communities here in the local area of all faith traditions. So if you have property, grow land, teach about food, and the ethical imperatives included in all global scriptures that talk about these issues. Thank you very much. With that, I'll leave it to our next presenter.
Thank you, Will. I'm gonna share my slide here now. Can you guys see me okay?
It looks great, Arianne.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much. My name is Arianne Corbett, and I wanted to use my portion of the presentation to talk about how food insecurity and food justice relate to children in the state of Florida. So in Florida, okay, there we go. So I wanted to talk about child food insecurity in the state, the impact of COVID-19, what our emergency feeding situation has looked like, and some different policy solutions and advocacy strategies to address child food insecurity and child food hunger. So Will and I are aligned, and we're using the same graph here as we're talking about food insecurity. And what we know is that in Florida and across the country, child food insecurity has been decreasing since the Great Recession. But in Florida, we rank 11th in the country in child food insecurity. We have about 850 kids in our state, or 20%, who live in households that are food insecure. So we know we have a lot of work to do. And it's really a critical period to think about nutrition and think about food insecurity, because we know that kids who have inadequate nutrition are permanently impacted from their learning, their test scores are lower, their social interactions are impacted, behaviors, moods, and productivity today and throughout their life. So it's a really critical period that we want to get this right. We also know, as Will demonstrated, that food insecurity rates in community of color, including Black, Hispanic, Native American households, are at least twice that of non-Hispanic white households. So this is all the state of things pre-pandemic. And so we know we were in a difficult situation before this hit. The other thing that we know is that food insecurity tracks really closely with poverty and unemployment. So this is a nice chart just showing, you know, when the Great Recession hit, what happened to food insecurity, poverty, and employment. You see that as the economy worsens, we see increased food insecurity. As the economy improves, we see things improve on the land of food insecurity. So, you know, this is all pre-pandemic, and we know we had significant issues at that point. As we navigate through this pandemic, the COVID crisis has disrupted our lives in ways that we could not have imagined, but none more so than for low-income working families with children. Unemployment has spiked sharply. Families have experienced income losses and increased economic hardship. Feeding Florida estimates that unemployment in the state of Florida could be as much as 35%. And given our reliance on tourism and our service industry, it's very likely that that scenario could play out. So, you know, we are expecting to see this same chart happen again in 2020. As a nation, we're estimating that we could see the number of children in food insecure households increase by 7 million. And, you know, what we know is that even families that still have jobs are facing big challenges in trying to decide, do they go back to work or do they stay home and care for their children? A recent analysis out of Northwestern University suggests that food insecurity rates for families with children could triple. And as you can see, again, communities of color are facing the brunt of this hardship. So while this COVID crisis is new, food insecurity is not. The pandemic is just exacerbating long existing problems in our food systems. And so, as Will discussed, we're seeing dramatic increases in need at our food banks, in our food pantries, and we're reminded on a daily basis of the millions of children who relied on school meal programs for the majority of their nutrition, 1 meal, 2 meal, even 3 meals a day. So there have been efforts to step up and fill that gap. You know, we're seeing massive lines at food banks and food pantries. School meal programs have set up enormous operations to provide food through drive-throughs, school bus routes, even delivering to homes. And outside organizations have stepped up to provide resources to make this happen. So one of those organizations that Dell mentioned that I work really closely with is No Kid Hungry, and it's a nonprofit based out of DC, and we have a good bit of work here in Florida. And that organization is working to end child hunger by connecting schools and communities or helping them better utilize their federal nutrition programs. So up till March 2020, that has been increasing participation in school breakfast, after school meals, summer feeding programs, and things like that. But they've had to make a very quick pivot to funding these emergency feeding operations to help fill the gaps that exist in our communities where kids can no longer get access to the school meals that they need every day. So in our communities, that's looked like in Tampa, the Tampa Bay Network to End Hunger created an innovative new program, Meals on Wheels for Kids, where they're delivering meals and groceries directly to families' houses. They're helping support mobile food pantries that go into the community and give food where it's needed. They're supporting farm to community food distributions and really trying to help shore up school meal programs that are going to be facing some big revenue gaps come next school year. So, you know, the theme there really is that these all need resources. There are challenges. Even where we, you know, are seeing some success, there are challenges getting meals to kids. One organization that I work very closely with is in Pasco County is the Farm Worker Self-Help Organization. And I'm working with them and the Baycare Community Health Assessment Team in Pasco County Schools. And what we've done is try to figure out a way to get the meals from the schools to the local community where children can more easily access them. So the district is dropping the meals off for us, and then we're literally calling family members to come pick those meals up for kids. And what we're seeing is that, you know, one caregiver is picking up meals for 3 or 4 families. I've seen one person pickup for 17 children. And we're talking about 5 breakfasts and 5 lunch, so 170 meals that we're loading into the trunk of a car. And what it really shows is that even though we're doing so much work in these emergency programs, that there are still big challenges. You've got essential workers who are at work and can't get to the window of time when the food is available. In Pasco County, for the school meal programs, they're serving from 11 to 1 on Tuesdays. So if that's the day that you work, or if you work every day, it's impossible to get there, and then those children miss out on meals for the whole week. We're seeing families that might not have a valid driver's license, and the risk is just too great to leave the home in their car and pick up these meals. We're seeing maybe that one caregiver has 17 kids that they're monitoring to help their friends and family and neighbors, or kids that are home by themselves, that it's not safe for them to walk to the local school to pick up those meals. I talked to a charter school principal in Fort Lauderdale, and she mentioned to me that a lot of the reason why she had public school kids come to her charter school is because they were leaving dangerous situations with the students that go to that public school. And so now, even though the school is 1 block from their home or right outside their door, going to pick up meals at that school site for the public school is going to get them right back in those dangerous situations. So there are all kinds of challenges that are emerging that we're trying to figure out how can we do the best for our kids, which leads me to policy and advocacy. So there's a couple of short-term policies that I want to talk about, and then one more long-term sustainable policy and an action item for you. So one thing, and I mentioned the emergency feeding through schools, we've had some really important flexibility on the policy side from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and our state agency, and they've provided flexibility on where and when and who can pick up those school meals. So traditionally in the summer meal program, a child would have to come to a summer site during a specific time, eat the meal on site, and then go 1 meal. So these flexibility, these waivers have given the opportunity for parents to pick up a week's worth of meals at a time, put them in the trunk, take them home to the kid, and then spread them out through the week. So that's been very important, and that has required a lot of advocacy at the federal level to get those waivers in the first place, and then they've been extended through the next school year, which is really critical for children in schools who are really, potentially coming back all virtual, or for those families that are doing the e-learning as a virtual option. Another short-term strategy and policy win that we've seen is the implementation of the Pandemic Electronic Benefits Transfer Program. So this is another short-term program, but basically what it does is provide each family of a child who was receiving free or reduced school meals with an EBT card with daily benefits that they would have received through the meal program at school. So it's $5.70 per day. In Florida, they have authorized basically to cover the meals from spring break through the end of the school year. So it's $313. It's not a huge amount, but definitely helpful and definitely an easier way for families to get the food they need, because they can just use that EBT card at the grocery store. So we would like to continue to advocate for that, to continue for the next school year, to help facilitate some assistance for the virtual learners. And then I just want to talk about the SNAP program. I know Will mentioned it, but when we're looking at long-term sustainable policy strategies to address food insecurity and food justice, we have to look at the SNAP program. The SNAP is one of the most effective ways to combat child hunger in America. It's successfully decreased food insecurity and lifted millions of Americans out of poverty, but it has a hidden benefit in that it's an economic driver. For every dollar that's spent in SNAP benefits, it generates $1.50 to $1.80 in economic activity in the community. So families get an amount that's put onto an EBT card. They can use that in grocery stores, corner stores. There's been a lot of efforts to be able to use those dollars at farmers markets. And that leads to more jobs, wages, local economic activity. It puts money directly in the pockets of farmers and distributors, because they can then afford more goods and services and food for themselves. And since it can only be used for food, it frees up resources and family budgets for other things like diapers or medicines. And it happens almost immediately. Most families' SNAP benefits are not enough. They run out by the end of the month. So, that's one thing that we want to talk about, but it's something that is used quickly. So as a stimulus versus like a cash benefit, which is also very, very important, this type of a stimulus goes onto a card, it's spent immediately, and it just continues every month. So this is definitely a way that we can help pave recovery for our communities. So now more than ever, there is a big effort nationally to try to strengthen the SNAP program. And so what we're asking is that in Congress, for any next recovery package, needs to increase the maximum SNAP benefit by at least 15%. We want to see the minimum SNAP benefit increase from $16 to $30 per month. And we want to extend that EBT, pandemic EBT, through the end of the next school year. So luckily for you, there is a nationwide call to action on Monday, July the 20th. And organizations from across the country, in Florida, it includes Bread for the World, Florida Impact, United Way, the University of Florida. We're asking you to reach out to your Senate offices between 9 and noon on Monday the 20th and ask for these efforts to strengthen the SNAP program. And Bread for the World pulled together this amazing list of legislative assistance through emails and telephones. So we've got everything you need depending on where you are in Florida. I've also put together the message here. You can copy and paste it or just read it off. I'd really encourage you, though, to call your local office because it's a great opportunity to build relationships with your Senate office and make yourself available as a key resource on food insecurity. It's so important also to tell the story, tell the personal story, talk about that child that pulls at your heartstrings, talk about that family that's never needed food assistance before, that, you know, is really the face of what this COVID recovery is looking like and why they need to invest in the SNAP program to bring those folks up and help eliminate hunger in our families and in our children. And the last thing I wanted to say is that look for key allies in your community as well. It's very important to have non-traditional voices in this effort. I think for those of us in the food and nutrition community, we deal with this day in and day out, but talking to leaders of the local churches, talking to key school officials, key hospital officials, folks in the criminal justice system, the police chief, those key influential folks in the community, talking to them about SNAP and how it can help your community recover, trying to eliminate some of those barriers, dispel myths, and asking them to reach out to their Senate offices can have a really large impact in the effort to strengthen the SNAP program. So this is a long list of resources that I use in the presentation. I also have my email here. I know we're going to take some questions soon, but thank you so much for the opportunity, and I appreciate, and I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Arianne. Well done as well. I want to let everyone know to please use the chat box to present your questions. By this point in our presentations, we probably have a lot of questions. I know we'll have more after our next presenter. So please use the chat box to get the questions up there so that we can move through them in a systematic manner and perhaps get as many questions as possible in there. That being said, it's my pleasure now to introduce Erica, and Erica comes to us now with a presentation on her approach to these challenges. Erica?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Yes, very good.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you to my distinguished panelists, Will and Arianne. Both your presentations were very enlightening, and they were also very encouraging, and the work that you're doing is incredible, and I'd just like to thank you both. Thank you, Dell, for moderating the panel, and thank you, Kendra, and to the Policy Council for this opportunity. I would like to start my presentation talking about, again, let me go back, what our topics are today, the major challenges to resolving food insecurity, in what ways the current food system is unjust, and then sharing one or more policy recommendations that would improve food insecurity and food justice. First, let me start by defining what food insecurity is. To some people that may have varying definitions or may not understand what it means. Healthy People defines it as the disruption of food intake or eating patterns because of lack of money and other financial resources for food at the household level. It's also been defined as the state of being without reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. For me, and the work that I've done in Washington, D.C., Southeast Washington, parts of New York City, parts of Atlanta and Washington, D.C. and New York, it's not just having lack of money, but also the lack of transportation and the lack of access to reach those anchors or grocery stores to have access to that food. Food justice, on the other hand, is more of a holistic, in my view, and a structural view of the food system. That it sees food as a human right and it looks to address structural barriers to that right. That could be in the form of exercising your right to grow food, sell, and eat healthy food. I consider this a movement which works not only for access to healthy food for all, but it also examines the structural roots of these disparities. And at the same time, it works to create racial and economic justice opportunities for all. In food justice, there's three different aspects in my research and in my work in food justice that people strive to and that people look to have. It's the access to healthy, locally grown, fresh, culturally appropriate food. There's the living wage jobs for the food system workers. They're often the unforgotten and unsung heroes of the food justice movement, the farmers, the farm workers, restaurant workers, food service workers, processing plant workers, especially now in light of the pandemic, communities of color are fighting public crisis on two ends, a pandemic as well as a food crisis and an economic crisis. So those people on the front line that work in food systems, we owe them a gratitude of thanks. And also for me, a very important aspect of food justice is community control, which is through cooperatives, faith-based initiatives, and community organizations. And right now it's very important in light of COVID-19, social equity, social inequity and programs. We should be looking to connect more communities together to create and develop more opportunities for community-supported agriculture cooperatives and community organizations to collaborate and work closely together. To me, and in the work that I've done, some of the major challenges to currently resolving food insecurity issues, as I mentioned, communities of color remain on the forefront of fighting these two public health crises simultaneously, the global pandemic and systemic racism. So low-income families are crippled and affected by this and by multiple overlapping issues like the lack of affordable housing, social isolation, health problems, as well as high medical costs and low wages. So to me, those are all major challenges. As we all know, this is nothing new to us. We know that this is one of the main reasons why we're at the impasse and the crossroads that we're at. Environmental and food justice intersect. And especially now, it's pulled back this ugly curtain where we can see many of factory farms and meat packing plants. They pollute neighboring communities' water and air, which are often situated in communities of color. So food justice efforts, to me, work not only for access to healthy food, but for an end to the structural inequities that have led to these unequal health outcomes. And that's what currently makes the food system unjust to me, in my opinion. Making a difference. Let's talk about something positive. Creating change. In the work that I do, it's all about creating collaborations, partnerships, relationships, engaging each other in dialect. Think about who you know, your partnerships, your collaborators, your friendships, personal and professional. I like to call it your sphere, your circle. Who's in that circle? If you're a part of an urban planning association or architecture networking association. I work in the legal field. I'm a member of various professional associations within the legal field. I'm also part of sustainability movements, so USGBC, the American Planning Association, Congress for New Urbanism. Whatever your passions are, whatever connections you have in those various disciplines, reach out to them. Their support may not always be financial. It could be in kind. They may give their time. They may give their skill. If they're an accountant, if they're an auditor, if you're looking for funding, if they're a grant writer, if they're a fundraiser, those skills are critical to your success and your sustainability. If you're looking to start a program, create your program, if you currently have a program that's new, if you're looking to restart and maybe re-energize your board, re-energize your team as far as your focus, your strategic plan, these are ways that you can re-energize and reconnect your board as well as yourself and your staff, an epiphany of sorts. For me, policy recommendations, sorry, let me go back one. This one is important. To improve food security and food justice, again, as I mentioned, when you're looking for funding, collaborations are key. I've been a reviewer for the USDA for almost 10 years now. When I review the grants, one of the key components is the type of partnerships you have, the type of letters of support that you have, the matching, whether it's financial funds, whether it's in-kind funds. USDA is very particular when they see that you haven't grew and you haven't connected and collaborated within your community. It raises flags about whether your program can be sustainable. Have you connected with enough groups and various groups to be able to provide the community what they need, whether it's in your faith-based community, your senior citizen centers, your day programs, your single parent programs. Look for similar interests. Look for groups that are environmental justice groups, public health groups, groups that study urban agriculture, social equity programs, racial equity programs, and do what I call an assessment to connect the disconnected. You'll be surprised as to how many groups you find that are doing similar work to what you're doing, whether it's in a neighborhood preservation, community development, economic development, land use, zoning, public health, water quality. All of these areas are connected and all of these disciplines are connected. What we need to do is just find ways to show each other how we can help each other and how we have similar interests and how these interests are connected. So I've been spending a lot of my time making these connections through conversations and through dialect. And finally, policy recommendations, as the previous panelists discussed so eloquently in the work that they're doing. That's key to creating, again, sustainability and creating success. One of the policies that I was lucky to be a part of that I thought was successful, which has been gutted somewhat with this current administration and with their feelings on urban agriculture and various initiatives related to food. There was the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, which the Obama administration created. And it was a combination of providing technical assistance, grants and loans to projects that seek to improve access to healthy foods by financing them, helping them write grants, teaching them how to write grants, creating food hubs, co-ops, innovation hubs, and helping food access businesses in urban and rural areas of need. Those were very successful programs. I was a part of one of them in Washington, D.C., which was the Corner Store program. And we went to the corner stores, to the community, performed surveys and found out if there could be a grocery store in these neighborhoods, what would be the top 5 things you would want. And it was so simple. They wanted water and fruit. So with the partnership we created, we put a display in these corner stores of water and fruit for 6 weeks, a pilot program with the funding from the city, from this Healthy Food Financing Initiative. I helped write numerous grants around the city to groups that was able to start a hub and, you know, a food innovation network and just various projects to at least study and explore pilots that could help their local neighborhoods, creating and funding innovative public and private partnerships, spark economic development, and it improves health. So my main suggestion and plea actually would be that when you set up your programs and projects, look to partners that you may already have and look to create new partnerships and just talk. I would say that's a big thing. And finally, what can you do? Volunteer your time. Again, that's key. Money's not always feasible for some people, but time is money and your time is invaluable. Join groups like the Florida Food Policy Council. They are doing great things in various communities with your help and with your voice to let them know what you may need in your community. You can become a leader and in your community, make your voice heard, make a difference, educate yourself, educate and advocate for yourself and others. And again, there's my contact info. I'm at Erica Hall Consulting, LLC. There's my email address. I'm also a new board member of the Food Policy Council, and I'm very excited. So please reach out to us. Let us know in your neighborhoods if there's anything that we can do, any resources maybe we can connect you to, and let's work together. This is a critical time in our society in multiple ways, and we need to feed each other and respect each other and promote each other. So again, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Erica. And thank you, Arianne and Will. I'm going to ask Kendra if she would to begin checking the chat box for questions and isolating those that we want to share with our presenters. So Kendra, if you would start doing that, please do so now. I also want to ask folks that have questions to please put them in the chat box. And as we move forward on this, please remember, everyone that's listening, this has been recorded and we will have it posted on the website of the Florida Food Policy Council. It's an extremely rich and valuable document. So if you want to get access to it again and get some of the facts and some of the data, some of the graphs, you can go to the Florida Food Policy Council website and you'll be able to find this document complete, the entire recording. As we go forward with this, I want to just raise one question to get things started, and that is the degree to which our response to food insecurity and food justice becomes reliant on institutional systems, including government systems and large not-for-profit organizations, and to what extent our response can be truly local, grassroots, and based on communities themselves. I believe that there's a real tension between those two responses to the challenges that we face. That much being said, I'm going to ask Kendra if she can have a question from our chat box to go forward. So Kendra, if you have a question for our group, we can get started.
All right, so our first question from Grizel is there an effort to reach out legislatively regarding the increase in food prices during the pandemic? Grizel is shocked to see the trend, especially as we fall deeper into the pit of this economic downfall.
Well, I can go ahead and start. I don't know of any organized effort on this, but I would say that when you call your senators, like I asked you, this is a really great time to talk. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of supply chain disruption and some different things with that, but if there are places where you see price gouging and things like that, I think, you know, reaching out to your local officials. I know that you can speak to one of the state agencies, and I can look into it and follow up about price gouging specifically. But I think this is a local story that your local Senate office can absolutely hear about and needs to know about, and something that they should be concerned about. I don't know if the other panelists have any other thoughts on organized efforts.
At the state level, a contact would be the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. If there's price gouging and there's excessive prices, that would be a place to go. And also the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Nikki Fried is the director of that. They would be engaged directly with agricultural activities and the food system. So that would be a place to contact. Whether it would bring any immediate relief, I don't know, but that's just another source to contact.
We have a second question from Thomas, and he's asking, are there any Florida coalitions working to transform the food and agriculture system in our state who have been successful bringing people together into alliances and partnerships that reach across race, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, White, and Asian? Racism intentionally separated us by race since agriculture started in the U.S.
I can take that real quickly. As I mentioned in my last slide, just one group I've worked with, I've brought folks up from Immokalee with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers down in South Florida, and they've done some great things that have been recognized nationally, internationally for that matter, and they've done great work in providing their Fair Food program, for instance, has done excellent work. Their Student Farm Worker Coalition, reaching out to them is one way to support sort of just local farmers, migrant farmers in the Latinx community here in Florida, for example, is one area that we can all help out.
I know that the Sierra Club is active in addition to just general environmental healing. The Sierra Club also is actively involved in improving the agricultural systems to make them more sustainable, but also to bring people together in that same spirit. I'd also reach out to especially the groups that Will mentioned in his presentation at the university, the USF Urban Food Sovereignty Group, which I'm a part of too, by the way, as well as Will. This is a broad-based group that involves faculty as well as members in the community. And a lot of the research that we do through that group is engaged actively within the Tampa Bay region and Tampa Bay communities, made up of folks from various backgrounds and various experiences.
So we had another question from Gabby, who asks, are there any plans for grocery stores in food desert regions to collaborate with organizations for a nonprofit that work with food recovery, like Hungry Harvest, that delivers edible food that would otherwise be sent to the landfill?
Erica, do you have any background and experience with that? It sounds like a topic that would be in your area of expertise.
What I am thinking is the food map app that the council is working on would be something that could possibly fill that void and fill that gap. Any type of GIS mapping data system project, I would think, would be a connector in that space.
Yeah, I like that. The question also, if I heard it clearly, Kendra, was about grocery markets, grocery stores. Was that the focus of the question?
Yeah, are there any plans for grocery stores in food desert regions to collaborate with organizations that work with food recovery?
In my experience in research, and I invite the colleagues too to weigh in on this, is that the large scale, industrial scale groceries that are part of the industrial food system tend to be resistant to local food efforts. It's very, very
Yes.
difficult, simply because of the scale at which they have to operate and their integration into the industrial food system. You'd have to look for local markets or local systems. In our own community,
Yes.
for example, we have a local grocery, it's called Wright's Market, and they have made a commitment to buy organic at the local level and buy local first. Now, a smaller scale operation can do that. The larger systems have difficulty doing it. And that's why I brought up earlier that issue, that fundamental question of, to what degree is our response to food insecurity and food justice predicated on reliance on large-scale institutional systems,
Right.
corporate and government, and to what extent can we begin to develop a reliance on local systems where the real change is going to happen and we can really make a difference.
And
That's
as
kind
you
of
say
embedded.
that,
Yeah, go
as
ahead.
you say that, Dell, I'm sorry
That's
that
okay.
you hit something that was very key, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but you triggered something with me that I see this as a time for change. We see that the big industrial, just what you said, they're reluctant to come in and put that anchor down, especially in lower income communities and communities of color. So I really see this as an opportunity for entrepreneurship, whether it's mobile, produce trucks, whether it's more CSAs, whether it's more co-ops. I just see it. And again, it goes back to my point about programs and policy recommendations. We really need to put money into infrastructure and in the financing, whether it's through low-income housing tax credits and new market tax credits, and put money into entrepreneurship to help the small farmers and the small food business entrepreneurs create opportunities for themselves. Your point is so well taken that I say we have to move away from the big cookie cutter grocery stores and supermarkets, and we have to focus our efforts and resources and money on the small mom and pop, the small business owner, the small farm worker that wants their own food truck, incubator space where you hone and train that next generation and develop a pipeline of people that we believe in, that we put this money and resources in, that can feed us and teach our kids and teach our communities about creating opportunities for ourselves as well as living wage. I really believe that.
That, Erica, there's a call to action. I want to also note that Arianne has put up on her screen, or on her PowerPoint, a list of the contacts for the 2 senators in the state that relates directly to her presentation. But those contacts work also for any other submission.
We're open. Yes, and thank you, Bread for the World. I don't know if anyone's on here from there, but that was
their refrigerator or something.
Yes.
Kendra, another question, please, so we can move forward.
Can I just add one more thing to
Sure,
build
yes,
on
ma'am.
Erica's? Just as someone who has worked, I've spent my work mostly in federal food policy, working in some of these larger governmental programs, school nutrition being the primary focus of that. And I think we've seen a lot of progress on connecting local producers with the school systems. And I think that's a place where folks here on the call can really help. That requires a lot of relationship building, a lot of support, a lot of help to some of our larger institutions. The school districts in this state are huge in some cases. And so they need help facilitating those relationships. They need help figuring out, okay, if I've got one producer here who can give me enough oranges for 10 of my schools, how am I going to get enough oranges for the other 50 of my schools? So I think people on this call that are really interested in that local agriculture piece can help larger institutions by reaching out and giving that that guidance and that expertise on the local system, because there is a real interest and effort, at least along the school systems that I've worked with, to get more local farmers working with them. It's the volume that's sometimes a challenge. And so if we can come up with creative ways to make that work through co-ops and things like that to help with the school system, there's, I think, a big opportunity to expose kids to more fresh produce, local, and really support those markets in a sustainable way that gives farmers continuous business that they can count on year after year.
Okay,
Arianne, I quick chime in on that, and then Dell, we can move on. I think this is exactly a great point. We hear a lot of talk about, education, and I think this is essential. But what are some concrete things that we can do? And you mentioned some great ones. That's why I even mentioned we can even start at home in our front yards. We can, for nothing, we can plant some seeds. Now that's not going to necessarily feed our families, on a large scale, but what it does is it allows us as individuals, as neighbors, to just start to understand the process of growing food, and that gives us a connection to the land, to the environment, which allows us to introduce our students to the very foundations of this country, which was based on the theft of land. And that introduces us to teaching about things like structural racism and how that is manifest in a structurally inequitable food system, right? So even just on a very basic home level, and then that can extend to, and that's why I mentioned to religious organizations, they have access to land. That is one of the largest difficulties. So they can use that land to start growing food. The same holds with any other, organizations that have the land. Just start very small.
beautifully said, Will. I'm watching our time, and we are fast approaching the end of our session. Tremendous work by everyone. Will, I don't know if you still have those peppers with you, but if you do, you can hold them up. And the peppers that Will himself grew.
I started growing these just about, 6 weeks ago, and I've got about 20 more in my front yard garden, and it costs less than $50 to build.
He's a professor at a big time university, and he spends his time also growing his own food. A little slogan maxim that I have is, if you're not trying to grow your own food, your voice in this discussion is weaker. Grow your own food and learn how to do it, and it makes a big difference. Okay, we've got to wrap this up. I'm so sorry that we've run out of time. Just a tremendous event today. I was honored to be part of it with the three of you. You shared so much, and you've helped so many people, I'm sure, at least begin thinking again and thinking critically about the challenges that are before us. Before we all leave, I'm going to ask Kendra to tell us just a bit about our next food forum, which will be at the end of the month, the very last Friday of the month. So July 31st. So Kendra, if you would, just a real quick snippet on what's coming up.
Well, first, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists and to Dell. Just a tremendous amount of information. Our next forum is going to be on the 31st, and our topic is going to be urban planning and the Florida food system. We'll have Earl Hahn and Mark Hafen be our guest speakers for that. If we didn't get to your question today, I know there were so many wonderful questions. Please reach out to us at info@flfpc.org. We are going to be posting this webinar to our website within the next few days. But reach out to us if you have questions, and we'll make sure to connect you to our panelists.
Yes, and join us at the end of the month on July 31st for our special Florida Food Forum that's going to deal with urban planning and the food system. And in the meantime, please take a look at the website for the Florida Food Policy Council. And if possible, if you can possibly see your way clear to share a donation with us or to become a member, it doesn't cost very much, but it does help support projects of the type that we brought to you today and other events that are related to the Florida food system. If you're interested in these issues, please support this not-for-profit organization that is really making a difference in Florida and in the world. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and especially thank you to Kendra Love for making all of this possible. My best to all of you. Stay strong, stay healthy, and stay friends with your neighbors. Bye now.
Thank you all so much for this opportunity. It was amazing. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.